My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 30 years old. I've learned something very specific about control. It rarely announces itself as something ugly. It shows up sounding reasonable. I work as a logistics coordinator for a regional distribution company. It's structured work, predictable, the kind of job where delays have explanations and numbers always tell the truth. I like that. I like knowing where things stand. I pay my bills on time. I track my expenses down to the dollar. I don't enjoy chaos bleeding into my living space, because chaos never stays contained. It spreads. My boyfriend, Ethan Blake, was the opposite. He worked in event marketing. Fast-paced, loud, always moving. The kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately take control of it without raising his voice. When we first met, I thought that was confidence. Over time, I realized it was something else. It wasn't about leading. It was about deciding. We'd been together for a little over 2 years, living together for 14 months in a downtown apartment with both our names on the lease. Everything was split evenly: rent, utilities, groceries. At least, that was the agreement. Ethan had a strong personality. That's the polite version. He was persuasive, assertive, very used to getting his way, and very good at making it sound like his way was the most logical one. If you disagreed, it wasn't that he was wrong. It was that you were overcomplicating things. And then there was Lily, his ex-girlfriend. They dated for 3 years before me. According to Ethan, she was emotional, difficult, someone who needed too much. But her name came up a lot, usually framed as proof of how much he'd grown, how much better things were now, how much more stable he'd become. About a month before everything changed, he started mentioning her again. At first casually, she's going through a rough time. Then more frequently, she had a falling out with her roommate. Then more specifically, she got kicked out. Then, she's staying on a friend's couch for now. I remember nodding, not because I cared, but because it wasn't my problem. Last Tuesday, I came home from work and found him sitting at the kitchen counter, laptop open. That expression on his face, the one where he wasn't thinking anymore. He'd already decided. "We need to talk," he said. I set my bag down slowly. For a second, I thought maybe it was something normal. Money, work, plans. Instead, he said, "Lily's moving in. There's no discussion." I actually laughed. Just once, because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "She'll take the spare room," he continued, already moving past my reaction. "It's temporary. A couple of weeks, maybe." I stared at him, trying to figure out where the conversation part was supposed to happen. "When was this decided?" I asked. "Today," he said. Why wasn't I part of that decision? He didn't even hesitate. "Because you'd make it complicated." That's when something in my chest went quiet. Not angry, not hurt, just clear. This wasn't a conversation. It was a declaration. And I don't live in places where I don't get a say. I looked at him and said calmly, "If she's moving in and there's no discussion, then neither is my departure." He smiled, not kindly, like I'd just said something mildly entertaining. "You're being dramatic, Natalie." "No," I said, "I'm being consistent." He leaned back in his chair like this was still something he could talk his way through. "It's temporary. She needs help. I thought you were mature enough to understand that." Mature, reasonable, understanding. I'd heard those words before. They always meant the same thing. Agree with me. I asked one more question. "When is she moving in?" "Friday." It was Tuesday. He'd already told her yes. Already told her she could move in. Already told her I'd understand. I nodded once. Okay. That caught him off guard, because I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't push back. I just said, "If she's moving in Friday, I'll be out by Thursday night." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Sure." Then he turned back to his laptop, like the conversation was over. And in a way, it was. The next morning, I called the leasing office. I asked a simple question. "What's the process for removing myself from a joint lease?" Turns out, it wasn't as simple as walking away. Both parties had to sign, and the remaining tenant had to qualify alone, or with a new co-signer. I thanked them, hung up, and didn't tell Ethan. Not yet. Instead, I rented a moving truck for Thursday evening, non-refundable. Then I called a friend, asked if I could stay for a few weeks. He didn't hesitate. By Wednesday night, I'd packed most of my things. Boxes stacked neatly against the wall of the spare room. Funny how quickly that room stopped feeling neutral. Ethan noticed. "Are you seriously doing this?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "I said I would," I replied. He shook his head. "All of this over something temporary?" "How, Meg?" I looked at him, really looked at him. No, I said quietly. I'm leaving because you told me I don't get a say in where I live. His expression hardened. You're punishing me for helping someone. I almost smiled, because that wasn't what this was. So, you can help her, I said. I'm not stopping you. I paused. I'm just not staying. That's when he said it, the word he thought would land. You're insecure. Maybe, but I wasn't going to be insecure and displaced at the same time. By Thursday afternoon, he wasn't angry. He was annoyed, still convinced I'd calm down, still convinced this was temporary. Then, at exactly 6 p.m., the truck pulled up outside. Chow. And everything changed. The sound of the truck outside changed the entire temperature of the apartment. 1 second, Ethan was leaning against the counter with that bored, superior look on his face. The next, he was standing at the window, staring down at the street like reality had arrived too early. You actually rented a truck? He asked. Yes. He turned toward me slowly. For what? I folded the last strip of tape across a box and pressed it flat with my palm. To move my life. For the first time since Tuesday, he didn't have an immediate response. He just stood there, blinking, like he was still trying to decide whether this was a performance or a mistake. I picked up the first box and headed for the door. He followed me into the hallway. Natalie, stop. I kept walking. This is insane. I didn't answer. The stairwell smelled faintly like dust and detergent. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as I carried the box down one flight, then another. When I pushed through the front entrance, the evening air hit my face cool and sharp. The driver handed me the key ring for the truck. I signed the form, took the keys, and just like that, the thing Ethan had been laughing at became physical, visible, heavy, real. He came outside behind me, arms folded, trying to recover his tone. She's just staying in the spare room. I slid the truck door open with a metallic jerk. And I'm just leaving, I said. He exhaled sharply through his nose. You don't have to make everything into a statement. That almost made me laugh. I set the first box inside the truck, climbed down, and went back for the next one. By the second trip, his voice had changed. Less smug, more irritated. Natalie, people are looking. I paused on the sidewalk with a lamp tucked against my hip. There it was. Not, I don't want you to go. Not, can we talk? Not even this got out of hand. People are looking. Embarrassment. That was the nerve. I looked at him and said, that sounds like a problem you should have considered before telling your ex-girlfriend she could move in. His jaw tightened. Inside, the apartment already felt hollow. My bookshelf was empty. The kitchen table I'd bought was disassembled against the wall. Half the living room looked like a stage after a set strike. Shadows where furniture used to be. Outlines of a life being erased in clean rectangular spaces. Ethan stood in the middle of it, turning slowly, like he finally understood that absence has shape. He grabbed the edge of one of the boxes before I could lift it. Come on, he said. Enough. I kept my hand on the cardboard. Move. You are overreacting. No, I said quietly. I'm reacting exactly once. Something flickered across his face then. Not guilt, not remorse. Just frustration that I was no longer playing my assigned role in his version of the scene. He let go of the box. I carried it downstairs. By the third trip, I could hear him on the phone inside. Low voice, fast words, pacing. I didn't need to hear every sentence to know who he was talking to. When I came back up, he was standing near the kitchen island, phone still in his hand. She doesn't have anywhere else to go, he said. I set another box down by the door and looked at him. That's unfortunate. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. You used to be kinder than this. That one landed closer. Not because it was true, because it was familiar. Kindness in his vocabulary had always meant flexibility with my own boundaries. Softness when he wanted access. Patience when he wanted control. He'd never understood that kindness and permission were not the same thing. I'm not being cruel, I said. I'm being clear. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. So what, that's it? 2 years and you're just walking away? I reached for another stack of folded clothes and slid them into a plastic bin. No, I said. You made the decision on Tuesday. His eyes narrowed. Now you're trying to make me the villain. I zipped the bin closed. I'm not trying to make you anything. That was the part he couldn't stand. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't trying to win. I was just leaving. And there's nothing more destabilizing to a controlling person than someone who refuses to stay in the frame they built for them. By 8:30, the apartment looked almost unrecognizable. My desk was gone. My books. My side of the closet. The floor lamp in the living room. The TV. The couch. The bed frame. The kitchen table. All mine. All loaded into the truck. The place looked smaller without my things in it. Colder, too. Like the illusion of stability had been built partly out of my contribution. And now that it was gone, the apartment was revealing its actual proportions. Ethan stood in the center of the room with his hands on his hips. "So what now?" he asked. "You're just abandoning me?" I picked up my keys from the counter and slipped the apartment key off the ring. The metal clicked lightly against the quartz. "No," I said, "I'm stepping aside." He hated that phrasing immediately. I could see it, because it made him sound exactly like what he'd been. Someone who had made a decision and expected the other person to absorb it. He took a step toward me. "You know what? Fine, go. But don't act like this is about principle. This is jealousy." I looked at him for a long moment. Maybe he needed it to be jealousy. Jealousy sounded smaller. Petty. Emotional. Something he could dismiss. The truth was harder to fight. "This is about consent," I said. "In a shared home." His expression changed just slightly. Just enough for me to know the word hit where I meant it to. Then I added, "And since we're talking about shared things, have you told Lily that both our names are on the lease?" He went still. Only for a second. But I saw it. A tiny pause. A crack. "She doesn't need to know that," he said too quickly. "That wasn't my question." He looked away first. That told me everything. I picked up my overnight bag. He followed me to the door. "Natalie." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. His voice dropped into something softer then, more careful, more strategic. "You're really doing this?" I stood there with my hand on the knob, feeling the weight of the room behind me. The silence. The stripped walls. The life I had already removed in pieces. Then I said, "You told me there was no discussion." And I walked out. I drove to my friend's place with both windows cracked open, even though the night air was cold. I needed the noise, the motion, something to hold on to besides the ringing quiet in my own head. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I might once the adrenaline wore off. But mostly I just felt still. Not good. Not relieved. Just certain. My friend helped me carry the essentials inside and asked maybe 2 questions before deciding not to ask anymore. I appreciated that more than I could explain. Around midnight, when I was finally lying on his couch staring at the ceiling, my phone lit up. "Ethan." I let it ring. Then again. Then again. By the 4th call, I turned the phone face down on the coffee table and closed my eyes. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 2 texts. The first said, "We need to talk about the lease." The second, 20 minutes later, "Lily's here. Call me." I sat up slowly, rubbed my face, and stared at the screen. So, she had arrived. And apparently sometime between my truck pulling away and Friday morning, reality had finally introduced itself. I didn't call him back. Instead, I called the leasing office. I kept my tone professional. Calm. I explained that I had vacated the unit and wanted to formally begin the process of removing myself from the lease. Then I asked, hypothetically, what happens if an additional occupant moves in without written approval? The property manager didn't even pause. "That would be a lease violation," she said. "Unauthorized occupancy requires immediate review." Immediate review. Such polite words for such sharp consequences. I thanked her and ended the call. 10 minutes later, Ethan texted again. "Why would you contact the leasing office without telling me?" So now he knew. Or maybe the landlord had reached out. Either way, the tone had changed. No more dramatic. No more insecure. No more lectures about maturity. Just logistics. Paperwork. Deadlines. The things he always assumed he could smooth over with confidence. I looked at the message for a full minute before answering. Then I sent one clean response. "I am removing myself from the lease. I will not remain financially responsible for an additional occupant I did not agree to. I'll sign the release once you qualify a loan or add her legally." That was it. No insult. No speech. No emotion for him to grab and twist into something else. A simple line. A closed door. He called immediately. I blocked him. Then I blocked him on everything else. Phone. Social media. Email filters next. Not because I was angry. Because clarity is easier to keep when someone else can't keep reaching in and muddying it. An hour later, an unknown number called. I let it ring once, then blocked that too. A second unknown number followed. Blocked. I wasn't doing this. I wasn't going to sit in the middle of some frantic 3-way discussion where Ethan tried to manage optics and Lily tried to pretend this was all a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was exactly what it looked like. By Saturday morning, the updates started coming through people who didn't know they were reporting back to me. A mutual friend texted, "Hey, did you really move out?" Then, apparently Ethan's freaking out because Lily doesn't qualify to be added to the lease. Then, 20 minutes later, also he can't keep the apartment alone unless something changes. I read the messages in silence, then set my phone down and made coffee in a kitchen that wasn't mine. The weirdest part wasn't satisfaction. It was how unsurprised I felt. Because this was always the piece people like Ethan underestimate. Consequences. They assume if they speak confidently enough, reality will bend around the version they've already decided on. But leases don't care who rolled their eyes first. Property managers don't care about intention. And signatures care even less. By Saturday afternoon, another message came in through a different friend. Longer this time. Apparently, Ethan was telling people I was sabotaging him. That I'd made everything harder than it needed to be. That real partners don't run at the first sign of discomfort. I stared at that sentence until it stopped looking like words. Then I typed back exactly one line. Real partners don't move their ex-girlfriend in without discussion. I sent it, locked my phone. And for the first time since Tuesday, I felt something close to peace. Not because the situation was over. It wasn't, not even close. But because the power had shifted. He was no longer speaking from inside certainty. He was reacting now. Adjusting. Explaining. Trying to hold together something he'd assumed would simply happen because he wanted it to. And I was no longer in the apartment. No longer in the argument. No longer standing in the kitchen being told what my own life would look like. I was out. And the rest was about to start collapsing without me in the room. By Monday, the pressure had fully shifted. Not onto me. Onto them. I didn't hear it directly. I heard it the way these things always travel. Through people who think they're just updating you, not realizing they're mapping the entire collapse in real time. Lily, had officially moved in Friday night. One mattress on the spare room floor, 2 suitcases, a careful kind of optimism. She'd walked into that apartment expecting something stable, something temporary, something manageable. Instead, she walked into a lease compliance email. The landlord had sent formal notice Saturday morning. Updated occupant documentation required within 72 hours. Failure to comply would trigger review. Review. Such a quiet word. Such a loud consequence. At first, Ethan tried to control the narrative. That's what he always did. He told Lily I'd overreacted. That I'd made things complicated on purpose. That this was just paperwork. But paperwork has numbers attached to it. And numbers don't care about tone. To stay in the apartment, one of 2 things had to happen. He had to qualify on his own. Or she had to be added legally. Neither option was simple. Ethan's income alone didn't meet the building's requirement. Not without a co-signer. And Lily wasn't as stable as he'd described. Freelance design work, invoices pending, between contracts. Phrases that sound temporary until they're measured against rent. Within 48 hours of moving in, they had their first real argument. Not about feelings, about numbers. She hadn't expected to be added to a lease. He hadn't expected her not to qualify easily. And suddenly the temporary solution had terms, requirements, deadlines. Funny how fast that changes things. Midweek, I got an email. Not from Ethan. From the property manager. Professional. Neutral. It stated that Ethan had submitted documents to remove me from the lease and retain the unit with an additional applicant pending approval. Nasi. Translation. He needed me fully gone to stabilize his side. I read the message once, then signed the release digitally. No hesitation. No leverage. No delay. Clean. Final. Apparently, that surprised him. He'd expected me to stall, to negotiate, to use my signature as a bargaining chip. But I had already done the only thing that mattered. I'd stepped out. And here's the part he didn't calculate. Once I was off the lease, the security deposit changed. Half of it was legally mine, and landlords don't redistribute deposits automatically when tenants switch mid-lease. Which meant, if he wanted to keep the apartment, he had to cover my portion immediately. From what I heard, Lily didn't volunteer. By Thursday night, their arguments had escalated. Not loud, dramatic shouting. Something worse. Specific. How much can you actually contribute? When are those payments coming in? Why didn't you tell me your credit was like this? The kind of questions that strip away illusion. Meanwhile, my life had become very small, very quiet. A studio across town. 6-month lease. Clean walls. No shared history. Mornings where I didn't have to brace myself for tension. Evenings where silence felt like rest, not distance. I kept his number blocked. I didn't check his social media. I didn't ask for updates. But updates came anyway. By the second week, the tone had shifted again. Less confident. More strained. Apparently the landlord had approved Lily. Conditionally. Her credit wasn't great, but Ethan pushed it through by agreeing to a higher security deposit and a stricter addendum. Which meant, if rent was late even once, termination could begin. That's a lot of pressure. for something that was supposed to be temporary. The first rent cycle came fast. Ethan had always been fine when we split everything. Predictable. Balanced. Now, it wasn't balanced. Loss. Lily's contribution was inconsistent. A few payments, a few delays, a few explanations. Ethan started venting. To friends, to anyone who would listen. Saying I'd left him in a difficult position. Saying I could have given him more time. More time. For what? For him to slowly introduce his ex into our shared space until it felt normal? Meanwhile, I paid my rent early. Every time. No conversations needed. Around week 3, I got a call. Not from him, from the landlord. Professional tone again. Calm. Just confirming you've fully vacated the premises? Yes. Good. Thank you. We've had a few complaints and wanted to verify occupancy. Complaints. I hung up and sat there for a moment. Then I texted the only friend who had been giving me updates. What kind of complaints? The response came 10 minutes later. Noise. Late nights. People over. Balcony smoking. The building had always been strict about that. Ethan used to complain about neighbors making noise after 10. Now, he was the problem. 2 days later, rent was late. 2 days. Under the new addendum that triggered a formal notice. Ethan was furious. Not at himself. Not at Lily. At the landlord. At me. At the situation. But frustration doesn't rewrite contracts. By the end of the month, Lily was already talking about needing space. Saying the pressure felt heavy. Saying living together was exposing compatibility issues. Compatibility. They'd been living together for 4 weeks. 4. Apparently, non-negotiable decisions feel empowering until the consequences arrive. And when they do, they don't ask who started it. They just follow the signatures. By month 2, the drama faded. Not because things improved, because they became predictable. Ethan's social media changed first. Less energy, more vague posts, quotes about growth, about resilience, about learning through difficult transitions. Translation. This isn't going how I thought it would. Lily's work hadn't stabilized. The invoices didn't come in as quickly as promised. Ethan ended up covering most of the rent. That's when the arguments got sharper. Not emotional, financial. She started pushing him. Budget talks, deadlines, plans. He pushed back. He hadn't signed up for responsibility. He thought he was offering rescue. Rescue feels different when it comes with automatic payments. And then the landlord added something else. After the second late notice, they required automatic withdrawal. No more, I'll send it tomorrow. Just paid or not. Lily didn't like that. Said it made her feel like a liability. Technically, she was. The noise complaints didn't stop either. Another warning, then another. 3 violations. And the lease could be terminated. Funny how there's no discussion sounds powerful until you're the one getting notices taped to your door. Meanwhile, my life stayed quiet. Stable. No sudden changes. No surprise decisions. No one telling me what my space would become. Just consistency. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized something. I hadn't escaped chaos. I had stepped out of it before it had the chance to settle in. And now, everything that would have happened to me was happening exactly where I left it. Without me. By the end of the second month, they weren't building anything. They were managing damage. And damage always gets more expensive over time. By the third month, everything tipped. Not dramatically. Not in some explosive cinematic way. Just predictably. The third rent cycle came due, and this time, it wasn't 2 days late. It was 5. 5 days under the addendum didn't mean a warning. It meant review. A formal meeting. From what I heard, the landlord scheduled it for midweek. Not optional. Not flexible. Compliance. Ethan went in alone. That detail told me everything. Lily had a client call, which in any other context might have sounded reasonable. But in this one, it sounded like absence. The landlord laid everything out. Clean. Measured. Documented. 2 prior late payments. Ongoing noise complaints. Multiple written warnings. Then the options. Bring the account current immediately and commit to 0 further violations. Or begin voluntary termination. Voluntary termination. Such polite wording for something that isn't a choice. It means you leave before you're forced out. Ethan didn't have the leverage he used to. No calm explanations, no confident reframing. Just numbers, deadlines, consequences. And Lily, from what I heard, didn't handle it well. She said he'd overreacted, that adding her to the lease had been unnecessary, that they could have just kept things quiet. He said she should have stepped up, that he'd taken a risk for her, that she wasn't carrying her weight. They were both right, and both wrong. Because the problem wasn't the lease. It was the decision that came before it. By the end of that week, they broke up. Again. This time it wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was tired. He said the pressure was too much, that living together felt suffocating. She said he was controlling, that he'd changed. Funny. Those words always show up, right after reality does. A few days later, I heard the final piece. Ethan had signed the voluntary termination. The apartment, gone. The same apartment he'd stood in 3 months earlier, telling me there was no discussion. Now, there was no renewal. The deposit, partially forfeited. The violations, documented. And Lily, back to couch surfing. Full circle. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt confirmed.
Fine.
Because this was never about winning. It was about understanding something simple. Control is not stability. And decisions made without agreement don't create power. They accelerate consequences. About a month after everything ended, I met someone. Not intentionally. Not as a reaction. Just life. His name was Caleb Turner, 28. Worked in healthcare administration. We met because he moved into the unit across from mine. The building was quiet. Professionals. People who minded their business. The first conversation was about a misdelivered package. The second, about coffee. And what stood out immediately wasn't chemistry. It was tone. There was no performance, no subtle tests, no pushing boundaries just to see where they'd land. Just conversation. Normal, easy, mutual. 3 weeks in, he asked me something simple. What happened in your last relationship? I didn't dramatize it. I just said, he made a major decision about our living situation without discussion, so I removed myself. Caleb nodded once. That makes sense. That was it. No eye roll. No suggestion that I had overreacted. No attempt to turn it into something I needed to justify. Just understanding. And I realized how unfamiliar that felt. One evening, we were cooking together at his place when his ex came up in conversation. He mentioned she'd reached out recently. You know what I told her? He said. What? No. Just like that. It didn't feel respectful to where I am now. No explanation. No performance. Just boundaries. Clean. And for the first time in a long time, I noticed something. There was no tension in my chest. No waiting for the next shift. No quiet calculation of what I'd have to tolerate next. Just space. 6 months after I loaded my life into that truck, everything had settled. My lease was ending. So Caleb and I were sitting at his kitchen table, and he asked, "What are you thinking?" Not, "Here's what we're doing." Not, "There's no discussion." Just a question. We talked. Budget, commute, privacy, expectations. 45 minutes. No raised voices, no assumptions. Just agreement. We signed a new place together. Both names on the lease. Clear terms. Simple. Somewhere in that same time, I heard Ethan had moved twice. Once into a friend's spare room, then into a smaller place further out. Lily had drifted in and out of the picture. Same pattern, different version. And one afternoon, I got a message. Not a call, not a long explanation. Just a short line. I miscalculated. I thought you'd stay. I read it once, then closed it, because that had always been the core of it. He didn't think I'd leave. He thought I'd adjust, argue, negotiate, stay. He thought non-negotiable only worked one way. But the moment he said there was no discussion, he ended it. I didn't fight him. I matched him. He made a decision. So did I. And mine didn't require his agreement. Because here's the quiet truth. Non-negotiable isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just moves. It's paperwork signed without hesitation. Keys returned without a speech. A truck loaded while someone watches from a window, still thinking you're bluffing. I wasn't. And in the end, the only thing that truly wasn't negotiable was reality. Rent gets due. Leases get enforced. And people either respect shared space or they learn what happens when they don't. I didn't stay long enough to find out. I just stepped out of the room and let reality finish the conversation for me. And this time, it didn't need my voice at all.